I started at Landmark West in 1999 when I was not too far outside of undergraduate college. I didn't really study historic preservation. I knew very, very little about historic preservation when I started, so pretty much everything I knew I learned from Arlene and from working with Arlene very closely in the basement at 45 West 67th Street. And, definitely it was learning in the trenches. It was, really learning how things work very, very quickly, and, the practical side of things, and understanding kind of why things work the way they do, like on the ground, running, getting your hands dirty, preservation work was, what I learned from the very, very start at Landmark West, when I didn't really know it any other way, and I think that was a really great way to learn and to grow. I'd lived in New York City for several years, but I, had not spent much time on the Upper West Side. So, learning not only about its architecture and its rich history and all the great buildings like, Dakota, the Ansonia, and, the West 67th Street artist studios, but also kind of about the character and the pride that the Upper West Side has. The people care very passionately and deeply, and there's very much an activist underlining kind of almost, the people who live in the Upper West Side, and the people, even the newer people who are coming here, want to live here because of that kind of activist tradition that it has here. Landmark West, definitely, out of all of the different preservation organizations in New York City, I mean, it really does have a very strong character, and that's a very feisty character. That's a very much the advocate spirit. They embody that. Other organizations obviously embody that as well, but Landmark West really has its own brand of it in terms of its feistiness, its outspokenness. It's just always willing to stick to what is right. I think that's what sets Landmark West apart. And also, being a smaller organization, it's an organization that can be more fluid and can kind of jump up and react very quickly, which is something Landmark West does very well, is kind of be on top of things and react quickly. Preservation is incredibly important to New York City for many reasons. I mean, I think that it wouldn't be the greatest city in the country, if we didn't have preservation, if we didn't have our old buildings, if we didn't have kind of what was left of the 19th and early 20th centuries and mid 20th centuries. That's why people want to live here. That's why people want to come here to visit. I mean, it's a vital part of our character and about our economy as well. And I think that preservation is only getting more and more important as the city gets older. And I think the Upper West Side is very much a model neighborhood for the city. It's a neighborhood where people want to live. There's a great concentration of not only, good residential architecture and residential buildings, but also commercial buildings. There's shops, there's mom and pop shops, there's all sorts of all the elements that make a city and make a neighborhood important really are present on the Upper West Side. I think people who don't eat, live, and breathe preservation like I do and like other colleagues of mine do, people who are just your average New Yorker, I think that they deep down really care about preservation, but they do take it for granted because they don't really understand kind of the process and all the hurdles that people who fight to protect historic buildings and historic neighborhoods have to go through. So I think that kind of the average New Yorker, it's ingrained in them that preservation is important, but they don't necessarily, know the logistics and know all of the kind of laws and the intricacies of how preservation works, and they can therefore take it for granted and not always appreciate it when it's around. But I often find people who are like, oh, I always assumed that building was a landmark, pointing to kind of, a nice but, unlandmarked building, a historic building. And I think a lot of people just assume that if there's a church or if there's a historic house, or if there's some sort of iconic building in their neighborhood, that is automatically a landmark, even if it's not, and that's automatically protected. And I think groups like Landmark West do a really great job of rallying the troops and kind of bringing out in people that inherent love for preservation and inherent love for historic neighborhoods and historic character of places when there's a need to kind of bring out the troops to help fight and help protect what's very important. And I think that the built environment in neighborhoods like the Upper West Side, it's very important, and it's it's very much connected to preservation, whether or not it's kind of the historic building or the store, the mom and pop shop that's been there forever, and there's definitely a very strong connection. I think looking at what Landmark West has done on the Upper West Side on West 72nd Street, kind of bringing that streetscape back and improving the streetscape and making the sidewalks wider, making the storefronts look nicer. I mean, that made a huge difference to how people perceive that street, and makes the environment, kind of the very local environment of just one street, vastly improved, and kind of can change the way they view the neighborhood and that thoroughfare. I think that what resonates most with people, particularly in New York City, are their very local neighborhoods, because they spend so much time there, and because in New York City a lot of us have very small apartments, we don't have big houses, we don't spend a lot of time kind of sitting on our couch watching TV. People are constantly out and about, observing their neighborhood, observing the characters, observing the stores, visiting the local establishments. So because you're spending much more time kind of outside of your apartment than I think most people do in the rest of the United States, where you might have, you might have you might spend a lot more time at home. I think that it means a great deal to people to have a neighborhood and an environment which is vibrant and interesting and unique, and something aesthetically pleasing to look at. And I think preservation, even though narrowly defined, it may it doesn't, the word itself may not necessarily imply all those things, but I think most people who work today in the field of historic preservation see this wider range of livability and the importance of neighborhoods as part of what we do and part of what we try and nurture in our work. I think that there always will be preservation battles, that there will always be buildings that are at risk. There's always a generation of buildings that are underappreciated, that are seen as obsolete. Right now a lot of it's the modern buildings and the modern era buildings. At one point in time it was the Art Deco buildings, and before that it was the Victorian buildings. But I think we will never lose the sense that those battles, because I think there will always be something to fight for, but at the same time I think the field can and is in a lot of ways moving beyond that, and trying to find proactive ways to encourage preservation and not always have it be a battle. I think working, making stronger arguments about how preservation is sustainable and environmental helps, and is a kind of one step forward with that. So I think that there are ways that the field itself is moving forward, but I don't think we'll ever lose our advocacy roots in terms of of fighting. I think it's great that Landmark West is celebrating its 25th anniversary, and I think one of Landmark West's strengths is that it's always been able to remain relevant and remain active. So, I think in the next 10 years, Landmark West, I'm sure, will find ways to kind of keep advocacy and preservation alive on the Upper West Side. What they do with their children's education project is really wonderful, and I think continuing to educate children and the parents of the children on the Upper West Side for the benefits of preservation and what preservation can do for the neighborhood is one way where they do that now. Landmark West does that now, but I think that expanding that and continuing that is one of the most important things for Landmark West in the next 10 years. Landmark West definitely needs to be around for the next 10, 25, however many years, you know, as long as it can be. I don't think it's ever not going to be relevant because although, you know, a lot of the Upper West Side is protected now thanks to Landmark West to under the landmarks law as either a historic district or individual landmarks, there are always going to be instances that come up where there'll be new development proposed or you know, inappropriate changes proposed. There's never going to be, development's not going to stop on the Upper West Side, and you know, having Landmark West as a voice for preservation is incredibly significant as the neighborhood, you know, continues to be a neighborhood. There's always going to be proposed changes to buildings, and you know, sometimes they're great, and sometimes, you know, maybe they need the guidance of Landmark West in terms of what is most appropriate for the neighborhood. The C of A committee consists of basically volunteers involved in Landmark West. Some of them are architects, some of them are you know, just neighbors who are really interested but also knowledgeable about the buildings in their neighborhood, and they invite architects to come to Landmark West to present their proposed changes and to really have a conversation with the architect or the owner about what it is they're proposing and how, if you know, if it improve the design that they're putting forward for approval to the Landmarks Commission. And that's incredibly important because it helps Landmark West stay on top of, you know, everything that's happening in the neighborhood, and it's also a really great way to reach out to, you know, maybe a new homeowner who bought a row house on 86th Street, and you know, it's a good way for Landmark West to get in touch with new people coming into the neighborhood. You know, I think the value of the homeowner for coming to Landmark West and meeting with the C of A committee is really that they're getting, they're kind of getting from the outset an introduction to the neighborhood and, you know, what the neighborhood's concerns may be if there are any. You know, I think it's just a good way for them to understand that this is a neighborhood where people care very, very deeply about what happens, and you know, they want to you know, try and make what's best for the neighborhood. I would have to say that Landmark West really made me want to go into preservation. So so yeah, Landmark West is really what fostered my passion for historic preservation and brought it to light.